Lena Monroe had never been one to believe in fate. She believed in strategy, in careful planning, in post-it notes and color-coded schedules. But as she stood in the doorway of her apartment, suitcase still in hand, flight wrinkled and jet-lagged, she began to think fate might have a particularly cruel sense of humor. Because standing in her living room wearing the same gray hoodie she used to steal during winter mornings was Eli Walker. He was barefoot, sleeves shoved up as he opened boxes marked books, the words scrawled in the familiar tilt of his handwriting. There was a coffee mug on the table, her favorite one, the one with the chipped handle. He looked up just as she stepped over the threshold. For a full 5 seconds, neither of them spoke. Lena. His voice hadn't changed, deeper than it should be, soft around the edges like a bruise. "What the hell are you doing here?" she asked, fingers tightening around the suitcase handle. Eli blinked. "Living here? Clara said the lease was good through November." She dropped the suitcase with a thud. "Clara? Clara sublet to you?" He gave a slow nod, brows drawing together. "She didn't tell me you lived here. She said her friend moved out and left the other room open." She left out a very important detail then. Lena stepped fully into the apartment, suddenly aware of how messy everything was. Not messy by normal standards, messy by her standards. His duffel bag was slouched in the hallway. A hoodie was slung over the arm of the couch. A half-assembled IKEA bookshelf was leaning against the wall. It was domestic, lived in. It made her skin crawl. "I'm guessing you're not thrilled," Eli said quietly. "Oh, congratulations, you haven't lost your gift for the obvious." He winced but didn't rise to the bait. "Look, I didn't do this on purpose. I was crashing at Owen's place and needed something fast. Clara offered. I said yes. I didn't think." He paused, then amended. "I didn't know it would be you." Lena folded her arms, heart thudding too fast. 2 years. 2 years of carefully reconstructing herself, of therapy and yoga, and deleting his contact only to retype it at 3 a.m. and never press send. She had moved on, or at least convinced herself she had, until now. "Well," she said, voice thin, "there's no use standing around. I'm exhausted." Eli nodded, awkward. "Do you want me to leave? I can call Clara, or maybe find a short term." "No," Lena cut in. "You signed a lease. I'm not the kind of person who kicks people out of their homes." "That's generous. It's practical." She headed toward her room, only to stop short. His bag was blocking the door. He moved it without a word. Later that night, Lena stood in the kitchen, microwaving leftover takeout from before her trip. The hum of the machine filled the silence between them as Eli sat at the far end of the couch, nursing a cup of tea. They had barely spoken since the hallway standoff. The silence was the worst part. It wasn't comfortable or casual. It was charged, dense with history. "And are you going to put together that bookshelf, or is it a modern art piece?" she asked, opening the fridge more out of habit than hunger. Eli looked up, startled. "I figured I'd do it tomorrow. I didn't want to wake you." "How considerate." She pulled out a can of sparkling water and closed the fridge harder than necessary. "You were never very good with furniture." "I got better," he said mildly. "Life forces you to learn." The subtext hit like a punch. Life had certainly forced them both to learn. She grabbed her bowl and retreated to her room, shutting the door with a little too much force. The next morning was worse. Eli's coffee had always smelled like home. Dark roast, French press, no sugar. She woke to it now and hated that it made her stomach ache with nostalgia. Padding into the kitchen, she found him shirtless, his back to her, kettle steaming on the stove. Lena reached for the cereal. "You couldn't put on a shirt?" "It's my kitchen now, too," he said without turning. "Fine," she muttered, pouring the cereal a little too fast. They moved around each other like strangers in a dance they didn't want to perform, careful not to touch. But every brush of air, every glance caught in reflection, was a reminder of what they'd once been, and what they weren't anymore. A week passed. They fell into a truce. Not peace, exactly, but mutual detachment. They coordinated cooking times, pretended not to listen to each other's calls, and avoided being in the same room after 10 p.m., but the tension lingered, thick and constant. And then came the toothpaste incident. Lena stood in the bathroom, staring down at her near-empty tube. She walked into the kitchen where Eli was hunched over his laptop. "Use my toothpaste." He looked up, blinking. "It was in the drawer. With my name on it." A pause. "Didn't notice." "Of course not." She crossed her arms. "And this is exactly what you do." You take space without asking. You assume. Close the laptop. Okay, it's just toothpaste. No, it's not just toothpaste. It's boundaries. Something you never understood. He stood, slowly. Don't turn this into a history lesson. Funny, I thought history was the only reason we're here tiptoeing around each other like landmines. His jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he would yell, but Eli never yelled. That had been half the problem. Instead, he said, voice low, I didn't come here to fight. Then maybe you shouldn't have walked back into my life. That wasn't the plan. No, it never is with you. They stared at each other. Two people with too much between them and nowhere to put it. And then, like always, they both looked away. That night, Lena sat on the floor of her room with an old sketch pad in her lap. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Guess she hadn't drawn in weeks. Through the wall, she could hear Eli's quiet laughter from a video call. It used to be her favorite sound. Now it made her throat ache. She pressed her pencil to the page and drew the line of his shoulder, then ripped it out. Chapter 2, Cracks in the Walls. Living with Eli felt like living with a ghost. Not the haunting kind, but the kind that sat across from you during breakfast, shirtless and infuriatingly calm, spreading jam on toast like he hadn't once left her heart in ruins. Lena had developed a rhythm. Wake at 6, run for 30 minutes, shower, work. Eli had his own rhythm. Slower, messier, always in the kitchen when she needed it. It was like living on opposing wavelengths, destined to clash but never quite explode, until the laundry war. Did you take my black sweater out of the dryer? Lena asked one morning, holding it up like evidence in a crime drama. Eli didn't look up from his cereal. It was sitting there for hours. I thought you were done. I wasn't. He shrugged. It was in the way. It's wool, Eli. Wool doesn't like to be touched. Pretty sure it's not sentient. She dropped it on the table between them. Next time, don't touch my things. He stood up, bowl in hand. Sure, maybe put a sign on it next time. Oh, so now you need instructions for basic courtesy? I'm just saying. No, she snapped. You're always just saying. Always making excuses instead of owning your crap. Some things never change. Eli's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he rinsed his bowl, placed it in the sink, and walked out, leaving the sweater on the table like a silent middle finger. Later that day, Lena buried herself in a freelance project, designing a logo for a startup that sold biodegradable cutlery. Her emails were piling up, her wrist ached from overusing the stylus, and her phone kept buzzing with messages from her mother asking why she was still single. And through the thin apartment wall, Eli's music. Not loud, but persistent. Some jazz playlist he probably thought made him sound thoughtful and introspective. Lena stood, marched to his door, and knocked. Nothing. She knocked harder. The door opened, and there he was, hair damp from a shower, shirt half buttoned. His laptop was open, blueprints pulled up. He was working, and he looked good, infuriatingly good. Yes? He asked. Could you maybe not blast saxophones while I'm trying to work? I didn't realize it was so distracting, he said, completely unbothered. Well, it is. He raised a brow. You used to like Miles Davis. She blinked. That was a long time ago. A pause. Right, he said, and closed the door. The couch became another battleground. It was the one piece of shared furniture that neither wanted to give up, but both wanted to claim. Lena would stretch out with her laptop and a blanket at 8 p.m. sharp. At 8:02, Eli would saunter in with popcorn or a book or some documentary she had zero interest in watching but couldn't block out. One night, she found him already there, sprawled across the cushions like a smug cat. I usually sit there, she said, arms crossed. He looked up from his tablet. You don't have a nameplate. I do have a routine. He smirked. I didn't realize it was sacred. Unbelievable. But instead of arguing, she sat, deliberately as far away from him as possible. They watched half of some crime series in silence. At one point, their fingers brushed over the popcorn bowl. Neither pulled away fast enough. They didn't talk about the past, but it crept in through old photos that surfaced in cloud backups, familiar meals that still tasted the same, the quiet habits they'd never quite shaken, like the way Eli rubbed the back of his neck when he was anxious, or the way Lena hummed while reading contracts, little echoes of a life they once shared. It wasn't always this hard. There had been joy once. Messy, intoxicating joy. 2 years ago. A summer afternoon. A park bench. Eli sketching a cathedral on a napkin while Lena watched him from behind her sunglasses. You could do this full time, she had said, voice full of admiration. I don't know, he'd replied, shy and uncertain in a way he rarely showed. It's not practical. I think we both know I'm the practical one. He'd grinned. You're more than that. You see things no one else does. And then he'd leaned in, kissed her, the napkin fluttering away between them. She had loved him most in those quiet moments. Not the passionate nights, not even the vacations or anniversaries, but the moments when he saw her, really saw her. But eventually he stopped looking, and she stopped waiting. Now, in the apartment they shared again, accidentally, bitterly, they passed each other like shadows. Until the night the storm came. It started with a flicker. The lights dimmed while Lena was cooking pasta. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Eli emerged from his room just as the apartment plunged into darkness. Shit, he muttered. Lena reached for her phone. No signal. Do we have candles? She asked, heart already thudding faster than she liked. Top kitchen drawer, unless you reorganized everything again. I like structure, she muttered, fumbling around. He moved beside her, brushing past her arm. Together they lit 2 candles and stood in the soft glow, shadows dancing on the walls. Silence. The storm howled outside, wind rattling the windows. Lena hugged her arms. I hate storms. Eli glanced at her. Still? She hesitated. Still. He didn't say anything, but he lit another candle and placed it near her laptop. Thanks, she said, softer now. They sat opposite each other at the table, the candle between them. Without electricity, but the usual distractions were gone. No music, no Netflix, no emails, just silence and shadows and memories. Eli leaned back. Remember that trip to Vermont? That old cabin? Lena stared at him. Why are you bringing that up? He shrugged. Storm knocked out the power then, too. You made us play charades by candlelight. She smiled despite herself. You were terrible at it. I was great. You were just bad at guessing. Your grizzly bear looked like a constipated toddler. He laughed, quiet and real. It sent a warm twist through her chest, painful in its familiarity. The silence that followed was different, not awkward, just present. I wasn't good at the hard stuff, he said suddenly, voice low. Lena looked at him. What? Back then, I didn't know how to be there for you when things got messy. I thought love was supposed to be easy, but I bailed when it got hard. She didn't know what to say. The words were like a draft under the door, unexpected, chilling. I thought if I didn't talk about it, I wouldn't screw it up, he added. She looked away, throat tight. You still did. Yeah. The storm continued outside, but the room felt oddly still. Lena stood. I'm going to bed. Eli nodded, eyes shadowed in the candlelight, but as she walked past, she paused. Thanks for the candle. He looked up. Anytime. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't shut the door all the way behind her. Chapter 3. Messages Never Sent. It was just past 2 a.m. when Lena gave up on sleep. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. She had stared at her ceiling for an hour, then her phone, then the faint sliver of hallway light under her door. She padded barefoot into the kitchen like expecting solitude. But Eli was already there, sitting at the counter, lit only by the fridge's open door as he drank orange juice straight from the carton. He froze. Guilty. She raised an eyebrow. You're a monster. He wiped his mouth. Couldn't sleep. Didn't expect to be caught mid-crime. Lena moved past him, reaching for the kettle. Caffeine at 2 a.m. is also a crime. Herbal tea, he said, lifting a box. I'm trying to grow. She gave him a look, half amused, half skeptical. Trying to evolve into a functioning adult? Exactly. Thought I'd see what maturity feels like. Lena smirked, then looked away quickly. She hadn't smiled at him like that in months, maybe years. It felt dangerous. They stood in a fragile quiet as the water boiled. Steam curled upward and Eli busied himself with 2 mugs. He didn't ask if she wanted one. He just made it and slid it across to her. Chamomile, her favorite. Still remember that? She asked, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. He didn't look at her. Not everything fades. A silence stretched, not sharp like before, but thoughtful. Heavy with things unsaid. So, she finally said, what have you been doing since? Eli blinked at her, surprised. Since we broke up? Lena nodded. He ran a hand through his hair. Working a lot. Got that offer from Ridley and Finch. Took it. designed some ugly corporate buildings, missed designing churches and weird art centers. I moved out of that shoebox in Brooklyn, had a thing with someone that lasted 3 months, realized I was just pretending. She swallowed. And you? Lena took a sip of tea. Started freelancing full time, learned how to meal prep. I go to yoga now. Let me guess, hot yoga. Regular yoga. I don't hate myself enough for the hot kind, he chuckled. Then, did you date anyone? She hesitated, briefly. He nodded, but said nothing more. The silence brimmed with memory. I kept wondering, he said suddenly, if you ever thought about me, after. Lena stared down at her tea. I did, too much. He looked at her, something raw in his eyes. I tried to reach out, you know. Her breath caught. No, you didn't. I did, he said softly. About 6 months after we ended. I sent messages, called, nothing. She shook her head. I never got anything. I thought maybe you blocked me. I didn't. Confusion flickered across his face. Then, a pause. Then it hit her. She pressed a hand to her mouth, whispering, Claire, your roommate? She was there when I was at my lowest. She never liked you. Said you were a distraction, that I lost myself in you. She deleted them? Lena's stomach twisted. I think she did. Out of spite. Maybe she thought she was protecting me, or maybe she didn't want me to go back to you. Eli's voice dropped. And would you have? Lena looked at him. Really looked. At the circles under his eyes, the stubble he hadn't bothered to shave, the vulnerability he never used to show. I don't know, she said honestly. Back then, I was so hurt, so convinced you just disappeared, like I didn't matter. I thought you were ignoring me. I assumed you were done. They sat with that, two people realizing just how much pain had come from signs and miscommunication. You know, he said quietly, I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. She exhaled shakily. Then why? Because you were drowning, and I didn't know how to save you without losing myself. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. I never wanted saving, she whispered. No, he agreed. You wanted someone to stay, and I didn't. It was the most honest thing either of them had said in years. Eli looked at her like he might reach across the counter, and for a moment Lena let her eyes soften, her hand drift an inch closer. The tension between them surged like an undertow. Then she pulled away. I should go back to bed. Yeah, he said, voice low. Yeah, me too. But neither of them moved. She stood first, heart racing. As she turned toward the hallway, Eli said behind her, I never stopped loving you either, you know. She paused, then kept walking, her door shut, but not all the way. Later that week, Lena found herself scrolling through her old emails, deleted folders, spam, old message archives. She found nothing from him, but she found messages from Claire, ones that hinted vaguely, cruelly at cleaning house and making sure Lena wasn't tempted to backslide. She closed her laptop, sick to her stomach. Eli, meanwhile, was sketching on the living room floor. Blueprints forgotten, he drew a small house with a sunlit porch, then erased the porch, then redrew it. He didn't know why he couldn't stop drawing homes he'd never build. He didn't know why every one of them had windows facing west, like the apartment they used to talk about getting someday, the one with good evening light. The emotional walls were cracking, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Absolute end of part 1. Things are heating up and the past is no longer staying buried. That was part 1 of Roommates with History. The tension, the almost kiss, the truths left unsaid, it's only just beginning. Make sure to subscribe or follow so you don't miss part 2, where emotional walls finally crack and nothing stays the same. Love, after all, doesn't always knock. Sometimes it moves back in.